The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on Ranger Captain Jake Morrison as he guided his horse through the scrub brush and mesquite trees. 3 days out from Fort Davis, he was tracking a band of cattle rustlers who'd hit the Patterson Ranch near Del Rio. The trail had gone cold yesterday, but Morrison was nothing if not thorough. At 42, Morrison had spent the better part of 20 years wearing the silver star of the Texas Rangers. His weathered face and graying temples told the story of countless miles in the saddle, tracking outlaws across the vast expanse of West Texas. He'd never married, never had children. The Rangers had been his life, his purpose, his family. As he crested a low ridge, Morrison's trained eye caught sight of something that made him rein in his horse. Below, in a small valley, stood the blackened remains of what had once been a homestead. The main house was nothing but charred timbers and ash. The barn partially collapsed. Smoke still drifted lazily from the ruins, suggesting the fire was recent, maybe 2 or 3 days old. Morrison guided his horse down the slope, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his colt. In his experience, burned homesteads usually meant Apache raids or outlaw attacks, and either one could spell trouble for a lone rider. As he approached the ruins, a sound caught his attention, soft but distinct. Someone was crying. Morrison dismounted quietly, drawing his pistol as he moved toward the source of the sound. Behind the collapsed remains of what might have been a chicken coop, he found him. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, sitting with his back against a charred fence post. His clothes were soot-stained and torn, his face streaked with tears and dirt. In his small hands, he clutched a wooden toy horse, one of its legs broken off. "Easy there, son," Morrison said softly, holstering his gun and crouching down to the boy's level. "My name's Jake Morrison. I'm a Texas Ranger." The child looked up with eyes that held too much fear for someone so young. He didn't speak, just stared at Morrison with the wariness of a cornered animal. "What's your name, boy?" Morrison asked gently. The child's voice was barely a whisper. "Billy." "Billy what? What's your last name?" The boy's face crumpled, and fresh tears began to flow. "Don't know. Pa never told me. Ma used to call me Billy Boy, but that's all." Morrison felt his chest tighten. In all his years as a ranger, he'd seen plenty of tragedy, but there was something about this child's vulnerability that hit him harder than most. "Where are your folks, Billy?" "Pa went to town 3 days ago. Said he'd be back by nightfall." Billy's voice shook. "Ma was sick with a fever. Real sick. She died that first night, and I tried to take care of her, but I didn't know how. Then the fire started." "How did the fire start?" Billy wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "I was trying to cook some beans for supper. The stove got too hot, and the curtains caught fire. I tried to put it out, but it spread too fast. I couldn't get Ma out in time." Morrison closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the child's guilt and grief. When he opened them, he saw Billy watching him with desperate hope. "I've been waiting for Pa to come back," Billy continued. "But it's been 3 days now, and I ain't seen him. You think something happened to him, too?" Morrison had been tracking long enough to know that if a man said he'd be back by nightfall and didn't show up for 3 days, he probably wasn't coming back at all. But he couldn't tell that to a frightened child who'd already lost everything. "Tell you what, Billy," Morrison said, settling down beside the boy. "Why don't you tell me what your pa looked like, and I'll keep an eye out for him. In the meantime, you can't stay here alone." "Where would I go?" Billy asked, his voice small and lost. Morrison looked around at the devastation, then back at the child who was trying so hard to be brave. In that moment, something shifted inside the hardened ranger. He'd spent his entire adult life alone, convinced that his dangerous profession was no place for family attachments. But looking at this orphaned boy, Morrison realized that maybe family wasn't always about blood. Sometimes it was about choice. "Well," Morrison said slowly, "I reckon you could come with me for a while, just until we figure out what happened to your pa." Billy's eyes widened. "Really? You'd let me come with you? Can you ride?" "Yes, sir. Pa taught me on our old mare, but she ran off when the fire started." Morrison stood and extended his hand to the boy. "Then let's get you cleaned up and find you something to eat. My horse can carry double for a while." As Billy took his hand, Morrison felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, the fierce, protective instinct of a father. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. This child would never be alone again, not if Jake Morrison had anything to say about it. That evening, as they made camp beside a creek several miles from the burned homestead, Morrison watched Billy carefully wash his face and hands in the stream. The boy had eaten hungrily from Morrison's supplies, but had remained quiet, still clutching his broken toy horse. "That's a fine horse you got there," Morrison observed, settling down beside the small campfire. Billy looked down at the toy. "Pa made it for me last Christmas. Said every cowboy needs a good horse." "Your pa was right about that." Morrison paused, choosing his words carefully. "Billy, I want you to know that whatever happens, you don't have to be afraid anymore. You understand." The boy nodded solemnly, then looked up at Morrison with those old beyond their years eyes. "Mr. Morrison, what if Pa don't come back?" Morrison felt his throat tighten. "Then we'll figure out what comes next. Together." 2 weeks had passed since Morrison found Billy at the burned homestead. They'd ridden to every town within 50 miles, showing Billy's description of his father to sheriffs, storekeepers, and anyone else who might have seen him. The answer was always the same. No one had seen a man matching that description. In the town of Sanderson, Morrison finally got the news he'd been dreading. Sheriff Tom Bradley pulled him aside, while Billy was distracted by a penny candy display in the general store. "Found a body yesterday, Jake," Bradley said quietly. "About 15 miles east of here, in that rocky canyon near Eagle Pass. Been dead about 3 weeks, I guess. Looks like his horse threw him, and he hit his head on the rocks." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Description matches what you told me about the boy's father. Brown hair, medium build, wearing farmer's clothes. Had a letter in his pocket addressed to someone named William Patterson in Sanderson. Probably came here looking for work." Morrison glanced through the store window at Billy, who was carefully examining each piece of candy, as if making the most important decision of his life. "The boy's been through enough. I don't want him seeing the body." "Understood. What are you going to do with him?" It was a question Morrison had been wrestling with for days. "I don't rightly know. Is there an orphanage in San Antonio?" "There is, but Jake." Bradley's voice carried a warning. "I've heard stories about that place. It's overcrowded, underfunded. Kids don't get much in the way of care or education. Most of them end up on the streets by the time they're 12. Morrison felt his chest tighten with anger and something else, a fierce protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. "What about families looking to adopt?" "Maybe, but it could take months to find someone willing to take on a child with no known family name or history. And even then," Bradley shrugged, "you never know what kind of people they'd be." That night, in their camp outside Sanderson, Morrison sat by the fire watching Billy practice, writing his letters in the dirt with a stick. The boy had been unusually quiet since they'd visited the town, as if he sensed that important decisions were being made about his future. "Mr. Morrison?" Billy said suddenly, not looking up from his writing. "Are you going to take me to an orphanage?" Morrison's throat went dry. "What makes you ask that?" "I heard you talking to the sheriff, and I seen how people look at me when they find out I don't have folks." Billy finally looked up, his young face serious. "I won't be any trouble, I promise. I can work hard, and I don't eat much." The desperation in the child's voice broke something inside Morrison. In that moment, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Billy, come sit over here by me." The boy scrambled over to sit beside Morrison, still clutching his broken toy horse. Morrison put his arm around the thin shoulders and felt Billy lean into him with the trust that only a child could offer. "I want to tell you something," Morrison began. "I've been a Texas Ranger for most of my adult life. I've tracked outlaws across half the state, faced down gunfighters, and seen things that would give most folks nightmares. But you know what I never had." Billy shook his head. "A family. I always told myself that my job was too dangerous, that I moved around too much to settle down. But these past 2 weeks, riding with you, teaching you things, watching you be brave even when you're scared, well, it's made me realize that maybe I was wrong." Billy's eyes were wide, hope and fear warring in his expression. "What I'm trying to say is, how would you feel about staying with me? Not just until we find your pa, I mean permanently. As my son. Your son." Billy's voice was barely a whisper. "That's right. You'd have my name, my protection, and my promise that you'll never be alone again. Billy Morrison has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Billy threw his arms around Morrison's neck, tears flowing freely now. "You mean it? Really and truly?" Morrison hugged the boy tight, feeling his own eyes burn with unexpected moisture. Really and truly. But there's something you need to understand. Being a ranger's son won't always be easy. We'll move around some, and there might be times when it's dangerous. Are you sure you want that kind of life? Billy pulled back to look Morrison in the eye, and the ranger saw a determination there that reminded him of himself at that age. I want to be wherever you are, Pa. The word hit Morrison like a physical blow, not painful, but overwhelming in its significance. Pa, he repeated softly. I like the sound of that. Over the next hour, Morrison explained what would need to happen. They'd have to go to Austin, to the state capital, to make the adoption official. Billy would need schooling, proper clothes, and all the things a growing boy required. It would mean changes for both of them. Morrison might have to request assignments closer to towns with schools, at least until Billy was older. Will you teach me to be a ranger like you? Billy asked as they prepared for sleep. Morrison smiled. If that's what you want when you're grown, then yes. But first, you need to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic. A good ranger needs to be smart as well as brave. I'll study real hard, I promise. I know you will, son. I know you will. As Billy drifted off to sleep beside the dying fire, Morrison stared up at the stars and marveled at how much his life had changed in just 2 weeks. He'd always thought of himself as a solitary man, married to his badge and his duty. But now, listening to the soft breathing of the child who would soon legally be his son, Morrison realized that duty took many forms. His greatest responsibility now wasn't to the state of Texas or the Rangers. It was to the brave, resilient boy who'd chosen to trust him with his future. The journey to Austin took 2 weeks, and during that time, Morrison watched Billy transform from a frightened, traumatized child into something approaching a normal boy. The nightmares came less frequently. The sudden silences grew shorter, and slowly, carefully, Billy began to smile again. They stayed in boarding houses when possible, camping under the stars when necessary. Morrison used the time to teach Billy everything he could. How to read trail signs, how to care for horses, how to start a fire without matches. But more importantly, he taught Billy about having a family. Families stick together, Morrison explained one evening as they sat by their campfire. They look out for each other, tell each other the truth even when it's hard, and they never give up on one another. Can you remember that? Yes, sir. I mean, yes, Pa, Billy said, still getting used to the new relationship. Morrison smiled. And Billy, you don't have to be perfect. Families forgive each other when they make mistakes. That's part of what makes them families. In Austin, the legal proceedings were more complicated than Morrison had expected. Judge Harrison, a stern man in his 60s, questioned Morrison extensively about his motives and his ability to provide for a child. You're asking me to grant custody of this boy to a man who spends his life chasing dangerous criminals across the frontier, Judge Harrison said, his tone skeptical. How do you propose to provide him with stability, education, and proper care? Morrison had prepared for this question. Your Honor, I've put in for a transfer to a position that would allow me to work out of a permanent base, likely San Antonio or El Paso. The Rangers need experienced men to train new recruits and coordinate operations. It would mean less time in the field and more time with my son. Your son? The judge raised an eyebrow. The boy isn't legally your son yet, Captain Morrison. With respect, Your Honor, he's been my son since the moment I decided to take responsibility for him. The papers will just make it official. Judge Harrison turned his attention to Billy, who sat nervously in the chair beside Morrison. Young man, do you understand what's happening here? Yes, sir, Billy replied, his voice stronger than Morrison had expected. Captain Morrison wants to adopt me and give me his name. And how do you feel about that? Billy looked up at Morrison, then back at the judge. I feel like I'm the luckiest boy in Texas, sir. I lost my ma and pa, but now I got a new pa who chose me on purpose. That makes it extra special. Something in the judge's expression softened. I see. And Captain Morrison, you understand that this is a permanent commitment? You can't change your mind if the boy proves difficult or if your circumstances change. Your Honor, Morrison said firmly, I gave this boy my word that he'd never be alone again. A ranger's word is his bond. I don't make promises I can't keep. Judge Harrison studied them both for a long moment, then reached for his pen. Very well. I'm granting the adoption petition. William Morrison, welcome to your new family. Billy's face lit up with joy. William Morrison. That's my whole name now. That's right, son, Morrison said, his voice thick with emotion. William Morrison, you'll always be Billy to me. But when you're grown, you might want to use William. It's a strong name. After the legal proceedings were complete, Morrison took Billy to the finest clothier in Austin and bought him a complete new wardrobe, shirts, pants, boots, and even a small hat that made him look like a miniature cowboy. Then they visited the bookstore, where Morrison bought Billy his first set of primers and reading books. We'll start your schooling as soon as we get settled, Morrison explained as they packed their purchases. A Morrison needs to be educated. That night, in their room at Austin's best hotel, Billy sat at the small desk, carefully writing his new name over and over again. Morrison watched from his chair, smoking his pipe, and marveling at the changes in both their lives. Pa, Billy said suddenly, can I ask you something? Anything, son. Do you think my real pa would be happy that you took care of me? Morrison set down his pipe and moved to sit on the edge of Billy's bed. It was a question he'd been expecting, and he'd thought carefully about how to answer it. Billy, I think any father would be grateful to know that his son was safe and loved. Your first pa gave you life and taught you how to be brave and good. Now it's my job to help you grow up to be the kind of man he would have been proud of. Billy nodded solemnly. I'll try to make you both proud. You already have, son. You already have. The next morning, they began the journey back to West Texas, but this time they weren't just a ranger and an orphaned boy traveling together. They were father and son, heading home to start their new life together. As they rode out of Austin, Morrison felt a sense of completeness he'd never experienced before. For the first time in his adult life, he had something more precious than his badge to protect. He had a family. Pa, Billy called from behind him on the horse they now shared. Yes, son. I love you. Morrison felt his eyes burn with unshed tears. I love you too, Billy Morrison. More than you'll ever know. 6 months later, Morrison stood in the doorway of the small house he'd rented in San Antonio, watching Billy work on his arithmetic at the kitchen table. The boy's tongue stuck out slightly in concentration as he worked through long division problems. His new school books spread around him. True to his word, Morrison had requested and received a transfer to a position training new rangers at the San Antonio headquarters. The work was less exciting than tracking outlaws across the frontier, but watching Billy thrive in their new life made every sacrifice worthwhile. How's it coming, son? Morrison asked, settling into the chair across from Billy. Good, I think. Miss Henderson says I'm catching up real fast. Billy looked up with pride. She says I might even skip ahead to the next grade if I keep working hard. Morrison smiled. Billy had been nervous about starting school, worried that the other children would make fun of him for not knowing his letters as well as they did. But his teacher, Miss Sarah Henderson, had taken a special interest in the boy, staying after school to help him with his reading and writing. I'm proud of you, Billy. Your hard work is paying off. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Morrison opened it to find Sheriff Martinez from the San Antonio office, his face grim. Jake, I need to talk to you, Martinez said quietly. Morrison glanced back at Billy, then stepped outside, closing the door behind him. What is it, Carlos? We got word from the Rangers up in Fort Davis. They've been tracking a gang that's been hitting homesteads throughout West Texas. The description matches the men who might have been responsible for that burned farmstead where you found the boy. Morrison felt his jaw tighten. You think they killed Billy's father? It's possible. They've hit at least 6 isolated farms in the past 2 months, always when the men were away. They take what they can and burn the rest. Martinez paused. Jake, there's something else. They think the gang is headed this way. If they are the ones who destroyed Billy's home, and they find out the boy survived, they'll want to eliminate the witness, Morrison finished, his hand instinctively moving to his gun. How close are they? Maybe 3 days out. Captain Rodriguez wants you to take point on this one. Your experience tracking outlaws could make the difference. Morrison looked back at the house, where Billy was probably still working on his arithmetic, blissfully unaware of the danger approaching. 3 days ago, Morrison would have saddled up immediately, eager for the chance to track down dangerous men. But now, the thought of leaving Billy filled him with an unfamiliar anxiety. "I can't leave the boy alone," Morrison said finally. "Jake, this is important. These men have killed at least a dozen people. If we don't stop them—" "I said I can't leave him alone." Morrison's voice carried a finality that made Martinez step back slightly. "Billy is my son now, Carlos. My first responsibility is to keep him safe." Martinez studied Morrison's face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Then we bring him with us. Set up a safe camp with some of the men to guard him while you track the gang." "No." Morrison shook his head firmly. "I won't put him in danger. Find another way. Jake, you're the best tracker the Rangers have. Without you—" The door opened behind them, and Billy stepped out, his young face serious. "Pa, is everything all right?" Morrison turned to his son, seeing the worry in those two old eyes. In that moment, he made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. "Billy, how would you like to visit Miss Henderson for a few days? Maybe stay with her family while I take care of some Ranger business?" Billy's expression grew cautious. "Are you going away?" "Just for a little while, son. There are some bad men that need to be stopped, and the Rangers need my help." "The same bad men who might have hurt my first pa." Morrison exchanged a glance with Martinez. Billy was far too perceptive for his own good. "Maybe. We don't know for sure." Billy was quiet for a long moment, then straightened his shoulders in a gesture that reminded Morrison painfully of himself. "Then you have to go stop them, so they can't hurt anyone else's family." Morrison knelt down to Billy's level. "You understand that it might be dangerous?" "I understand that you're a Ranger, and Rangers protect people. That's who you are, Pa. That's who I want to be when I grow up." Billy paused, then added quietly, "But you have to promise to come back. Promise you won't leave me alone." Morrison pulled Billy into a fierce hug. "I promise, son. I will always come back to you. Always." 2 days later, Morrison rode out with a team of Rangers, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he was leaving the most precious thing in his life behind. But Billy had been right. This was who Morrison was, and stopping dangerous men was what he did. The confrontation with the gang came at dawn on the 3rd day, in a narrow canyon 20 miles south of San Antonio. Morrison's tracking skills led the Rangers straight to the outlaws' camp, and the fight was brief but decisive. When the smoke cleared, 3 of the gang members were dead and 2 were captured alive. Among the dead was a man Morrison recognized from Billy's description, the same man who had likely killed the boy's first father and burned his home. Justice had finally been served, but Morrison felt no satisfaction, only relief that the threat to his family was over. He rode back to San Antonio faster than he'd ever ridden before, his heart not settling until he saw Billy waiting on the front porch of their little house, his face lighting up with joy when he spotted his father approaching. "Pa, you came back." Morrison dismounted and swept Billy into his arms, holding him tight. "I told you I would. A Morrison always keeps his promises." That night, as they sat together after supper, Billy showed Morrison all the schoolwork he'd completed while his father was away. The boy had not only kept up with his studies, but had excelled, earning praise from Miss Henderson for his dedication. "I'm proud of you, son," Morrison said, looking through Billy's carefully written essays and arithmetic problems. "You've grown up a lot while I was gone." "I had to," Billy said simply. "I'm a Morrison now. We take care of ourselves and each other." Morrison smiled, realizing that somewhere along the way, Billy had truly become his son, not just in name, but in spirit. The boy had learned what it meant to be part of family, to carry a name with pride and responsibility. "That's right, Billy Morrison. We take care of each other, and we always will." As Billy drifted off to sleep that night, Morrison sat by his bedside, watching the peaceful face of the child who had changed his life so completely. 6 months ago, he'd been a solitary man with nothing but his badge and his duty. Now he was a father with a son who looked up to him, depended on him, and loved him unconditionally. The name Morrison would continue now, carried by a boy who had chosen it and a man who had chosen him. It wasn't the family either of them had been born to, but it was the family they had made together, and that made it perfect. In the morning, there would be more lessons to teach, more memories to make, and more adventures to share. But tonight, Jake Morrison was simply a father watching over his sleeping son, grateful for the burned homestead and the crying child that had led him to discover what truly mattered in life.